Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast. Hey, future wealth builders. Welcome to another episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast. I am your host, Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and today we will focus on stages 1, 2, and 4 of my 7-stage generational wealth model. And to help lead the discussion will be Brian Thomas, a speaker and a mentor who helps students develop financial literacy and accountability as they prepare for their independent financial lives. So, Brian, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
If this is your first time tapping into the New Wealth Wave podcast, it's based on my 7-stage generational wealth model. The model focuses on 3 phases, the past, the present, and the future, broken down into 7 stages. So let's get into it. Stage 1 is our internal and external ecosystem. Walls in and walls out, it sets the foundation for our financial journey. Stage 2, financial genetic code, where we focus on our financial traumas and anxieties. Both are byproducts of stage 1. Both of these stages are related to our past. Stage 3, financial healing. We begin the healing process, reprogramming our financial genetic code, all of those inherited financial narratives we speak about. Stage 4, financial edification. This is where we focus on both financial literacy and financial inclusion. Again, Brian will be touching on stage 4 as well this afternoon. Stage 5, financial well-being. We all want to achieve this, focusing on not outliving our income. Financial health equals financial wealth. We all want a soft landing. Stage 6, generational knowledge. This stage provides us with the blueprint to properly transfer our knowledge and assets to create our financial footprints, which leads us to stage 7. Generational wealth. Stages 5, 6, and 7 can be recognized as our future. However, depending on your entry into the model, your present stage is a stage that you are currently in. As I say, 10 toes down. This is Brian's second time in the studio, back which seems like many moons ago, almost a year ago to this day. Brian was featured in episode 13, and guess what? That was our 6th most watched episode podcast of 2024 and currently in 2025 as well. So before we get into the heavy lifting, I always ask a question. Tell us a fun fact about yourself. But what I'm going to do something different here. I want you to go back to episode 13 and you can hear about Brian's fun fact. You can hear about his aha moment. You can also hear about where he is at currently on the model. But what I will ask Brian, a year ago, you came onto the podcast and I asked you about the 7-stage generational wealth model. So fast forward to today. What is your thoughts today on the 7-stage generational wealth model?
Actually, I've been using the model in some of my learnings and teachings with some of my mentees and some of the people that I coach. I found the model very comprehensive a year ago. It still relates very much to the discussions I'm having with individuals. But the most important thing is that it relates to both your personal and your financial growth. By looking at your past, present, and future, we grow as individuals and hopefully our finances grow as well.
Future Wealth Builders, please find us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and all the major social media platforms. Brian, let's get right into the questions. What are some things you focus on to increase financial literacy?
Primarily, I'm focused on mentoring and coaching. I'm speaking to college and high school students about the importance of financial literacy and also the importance of personal growth, which is the foundation of what you need to be able to manage money. And then more recently, I've dabbled in entrepreneurship. I acquired a business last year and I've been focusing on that business. It helps me get engaged with a lot of other business owners. I'm really applying all of the things that I learn around financial literacy in the business itself.
That's outstanding information. I know when we spoke earlier in the month, you told me about your business that you have. I think it was a food truck. Does that sound familiar?
It's actually a food and craft market. And so each Saturday and Sunday in downtown San Diego, we host a food and craft market where vendors can rent a space and sell food and crafts. We also have musicians that come out. And so it keeps me close to a variety of entrepreneurs because vendors rent booths from us, they register, they sell their goods. And often I find that they are either in the early stages of entrepreneurship, and some of those vendors have restaurants and they're just coming to the market as a pop-up on the weekend. So it's sort of a way for me to continue mentoring, but closer to the actual entrepreneurs as they deliver their services.
So you mentioned you give entrepreneurs an opportunity to sell the services, so to speak. What are some of the struggles that you find with these entrepreneurs getting this opportunity? You as a mentor itself, but what are some of the struggles that you see and you're able to lean into that to allow them to grow?
One of the basic things is that a lot of these entrepreneurs don't have advanced degrees, so they may not really understand how to set up contracts. They may not be familiar going through a lot of the red tape associated with the government licensing and permit process. So we tend to guide a lot of the vendors who apply to come to our market. We sort of guide them through the process of how to get permits if they're just getting started. And so it's a breeding ground for me because I'm doing a lot of mentoring and coaching with SCORE, the Service Corps Retired Executives. And so this really helps me get on the ground floor. But a lot of them just need help, maybe setting up website, accounting, social media, a lot of the basic foundational things. They all have products and they all know how to sell it, but they don't necessarily know foundationally how to set up a business for success.
I tell you what, I've been so excited because I wanted to get you back on to the podcast because when you mentioned the financial passengers in our first episode, it was something that resonated with me. And I shared with you that, in my upcoming book that we have some of your excerpts in the book itself because it's such a profound statement. Brian, can you explain the spectrum of intention and how it relates to building wealth?
Definitely. The spectrum of intention is a model that measures how intentional you are in controlling the direction and quality of your life. And I created it to help me understand my client's starting point because you can't really be successful, you can't really experience growth, and you can't build wealth by chance. You have to be intentional. So I'd like to start out by describing and having a discussion about what does it mean to be intentional. So let me just share a slide with the definition of intention. The Cambridge Dictionary describes intention as something that you want and plan to do. And that's pretty basic. I prefer the second slide definition, which comes from the Webster Dictionary. Intention is when the mind, with great earnestness and of choice, fixes its view on an idea, considers it from every side, and will not be called off by the ordinary solicitation of other ideas. Now that's a mouthful, but basically what it means is having intention is when you desire something that you want. Living intentionally means that you're committed and accountable to getting that thing that you want and to getting it done regardless of the obstacles. So that's basically what intention is all about.
Thank you for that definition of intention. Could you share the model with us? We can take a look at it so our viewers can see it as well?
Sure, definitely. I'll bring up the slide so that you can see the model. This model is the spectrum of intentional living. There's 5 points on the spectrum. Let me explain what each one looks like because every individual falls somewhere on the spectrum and it varies. This first slide just shows all of the points on the spectrum from the bottom to the top. And I want to first start off by talking about this next slide, which is the passenger. At the bottom end of the spectrum is the passenger. And this is basically a person who is dependent on other people to control the direction and quality of their life. The next step on the spectrum is what we consider the navigator. And the navigator is somebody who's figuring things out. They're navigating the twists and turns of life. They're gaining enough skills to be less dependent on other people, but they're really focused on surviving versus thriving. In the center of the spectrum is the driver. And the driver has enough knowledge and skills to live independently, to take care of themselves, maybe to take care of their family. But generally, most drivers are focused on short-term goals and not really able to see where their life is heading in the long term. Near the upper end of the spectrum is the traveler. And this is a person who understands that they control the direction and quality of their life. They have a plan for their future and they're executing the plan with success. And at the very top of the spectrum is the guide. The guide is a person who's achieved personal and financial independence. They're doing what you would call living their best life. And then more importantly, they're helping to change the lives of others. So in a nutshell, that's basically the spectrum.
So at the top of the spectrum, it sounds like you're basically achieving stage 5 in the model, financial well-being. Pretty much you're living your best life, financial health is wealth. You're not outliving your income. You're in a position now that you can help others, guide them to get to where you want to get to, actually find out exactly what they want to do. So when you bring these individuals in, you can sit down with them and show them the model and say, hey, this is where you're at, from the passenger side all the way up to the end, which is ideal because now, people are more visual. So with that being said, where on the spectrum do you find most people on the model?
Most adults are drivers. They've achieved some way to take care of themselves, to live independently. While most students that I come across are obviously passengers. They're dependent on their parents, their caregivers, or someone else to provide for their basic needs: food, clothing, a roof over their head, etc.
I know you touched on it, but give us some more examples of what a passenger would look like.
Well, obviously, we all start out as passengers in our life. When we're born as children, we're totally dependent on our parents or our caregivers to take care of us. High school students are another example of passengers. Adults who may be on government assistance or depending on the government to provide for them in some way or another. Another example might be unemployed adult who's relying on their parents. Maybe they come back to live with their parents because somehow they just haven't figured out how to get a good job and take care of themselves. So it's really anyone who allows someone else or requires someone else to take care of them. And that person essentially is controlling the direction and quality of their life. Is somewhat you would consider it maybe your host. If they have a great life, then even as a passenger, if your parents are wealthy, you could still have a great life, but you're still somewhat of a host. That makes sense.
So what is the key difference between a passenger and a navigator?
The main difference is that a navigator has decided to become more independent, and they're in the progress of doing that. They're developing skills, becoming more knowledgeable. They're acquiring assets. Passengers who fail to launch don't become navigators. The key difference is it's somebody who's being intentional about becoming independent.
So what must individuals do to move from driver to a traveler?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's pretty much familiar with moving from stage 5 to stage 6 in the generational wealth model, from financial well-being to generational knowledge. A person decides that they want to move beyond the comfort zone that they work so hard to get into. Most people who are drivers, they figure that they've made it. They might be well off. They might have a home, a family. They're getting all the things in life that people want. But at some point, they begin to redefine their purpose in life and establish sort of new goals. This happened to me after I had achieved what I felt was a pretty successful career. I'd gone beyond my midlife crisis, and I think this is more of a midlife awakening, where you start thinking about what's next for me. Do I want to keep doing this for the rest of my life? Is this what really makes me happy every day? You really have to have that awakening to even want to move to the traveler stage.
You mentioned how you had an awakening, so to speak, right? An epiphany to say, I'm going to want to do something else. But you put yourself in a very unique situation because not everybody is in a situation that you are. And what I mean by that is that when we talked about the model itself, stage 1 through stage 3, we talked about internal external ecosystem, financial genetic code, financial healing, reprogramming inherited financial narratives. We talked about that, right? So we know that about the model. But my argument is that stage 4 is so important because that's the financial edification, both with literacy and inclusion. And you did such a great job in the inclusion piece of it and the literacy piece of it that it allowed you to retire, live your best life in stage 5, so to speak. Now you're able to give back and find out, I have some other things that I want to do. And now you know your why. That's why it's so important that you have to address stage 4. It's so critical because that sets you up. And I do believe, again, that most of us are chasing the wrong thing. We always say generational wealth. And I always say generational wealth isn't for us. What we're trying to get to is a soft landing. Stage 5 is financial well-being. And you've been able to do that. By you being able to do that, now you're able to give back and pour into the community and help those other individuals like yourself. Because I'm sure you see individuals like you say, I was just like that at one point. So now you're going to give them the knowledge and tools and the skill set for them to move forward. So my next question for you is, can an individual find themselves going backward on the spectrum?
Definitely. Circumstances in your life can propel you up or pull you back down on the spectrum. And that's just natural. If I look at my life, for example, when I was in my second year of college, I was trying to figure things out. I had a roommate. I was going to school, and my mom had a stroke and passed away. At that time, I always felt like if I got in trouble, I could go back home. Her death propelled me to becoming a driver even before I was ready. Life circumstances can push you forward. They can also pull you back. For example, you could be pretty successful, have a good job, and then you have some type of debilitating injury or disability. And now all of a sudden you're depending on someone else to take care of you, either physically or financially. So you can definitely move backwards and forward because that's basically what life does to you. It puts these challenges in front of us. We just have to be intentional about how we respond or intentional about how we're moving forward. So that's the key thing with the spectrum is identifying where someone's starting at, but then giving them the tools, the understanding, and the knowledge to know what they need to do to move forward. For me, the ultimate goal wasn't necessarily financial independence. It was personal independence. It was not being dependent on an employer to tell me how to spend my time every day. And so that was as much of a motivation as the financial piece.
We all go through that, right? At some point, we want to be our own boss. We don't want someone to tell us what we have to do. So, Future Wealth Builders, please find us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and all the major social media platforms. Today, we're thrilled to welcome back in the studio Brian Thomas, a speaker and mentor who helps students develop financial literacy and accountability as they prepare for their independent financial lives. Let's get to the next set of questions for you. Many people inherit a silence around money. How do you break through that generational silence in your work, and why does that matter in today's world?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a comfort zone around being silent about money when you meet people. It gives you a false sense of being on a level playing field. If you don't talk about money with people when you meet them, either in a social setting or at work, the more educated you become about money, the easier it is for you to have money conversations. So a lot of people who aren't necessarily well educated about money tend to avoid those conversations. The best way to get over that silence is to educate yourself.
So does breaking that silence help someone move forward on the spectrum of intention?
Definitely, because the first step in becoming intentional is really to have a vision of what your future looks like, whether that's financially or personally. And talking about your future increases the likelihood that you'll actually decide to take action and do something about it. The whole concept of living intentionally can only happen if you continue to have a vision of where you're headed. Otherwise, you'll just be taking life on day by day as it comes at you, reacting to life circumstances, and then either stepping up or falling back. Living intentionally means consciously every day doing what the most important thing is today to move you towards that future goal.
Yeah, I agree. It's always best to be proactive versus reactive. So for those who've never been taught financial strategy, especially first generational earners, what's the first step in building a structure without shame?
I like to introduce them to the various types of financial accounts. This really broadens their perspective of managing money for a variety of reasons, beyond just paying bills and saving money. So most people, when you're young, you think about checking and savings, and then all of a sudden you start learning about credit cards. So I like to give them a view of all of the different financial accounts, all the way up to 401ks, trusts, IRAs. What are all these things and what are all these financial accounts all about? That really gives them a broader perspective of the different tools that you use to manage money.
I firmly agree with that. My argument is that financial literacy is a Band-Aid to a much bigger problem, and that's development. That's why the development of the 7-stage generational wealth model, we go from the behavioral aspect of it all, because we have to know what's driving these decisions, the inherited financial narratives, like at your money scripts and things of that nature, these cognitive biases that we bring to the table. So with that being said, would you say this lack of foundation is why so many people stay in the passenger roles?
Many people stay a passenger because it's comfortable. And in some cases, others have enabled them to be passengers. As humans, we naturally avoid pain and we seek comfort. But growth requires discomfort. Some people choose to be passengers and others find themselves, due to circumstances, being passengers. If you lose your job and you haven't prepared yourself, you haven't saved for an emergency, you are going to rely on someone else to either lend you money or to let you stay with them until you get back on your feet. There's a variety of reasons, but the foundation, I think, isn't necessarily the fact that you are a passenger. The foundation is intention, that you are being intentional about preparing to put yourself in a position. So if you do have a setback, you're ready, either financially or skill wise. You can deal with those setbacks because you've anticipated them happening to you.
When you're talking about the passenger, I immediately start thinking about when you have those individuals who are taking care of their parents because they may be elderly, long-term care issues, so to speak. That parent now is a passenger to the child. I remember my father used to tell me, twice a baby, once a man. As I've gotten older, now it makes sense to me because at some point, in most cases, someone's going to have to take care of you possibly twice in your life. You have one time in the life where you don't. So twice a baby, once a man. So it follows what you're speaking of in terms of the passenger, because circumstances can come into play that positions you to be a passenger. That's why it's important to plan. Make sure you're planning, make sure you have your long-term care in place, life insurance, all the things that you need to have, your insurances need to be in place, because oftentimes and not, you're pushing that burden to your kids, and now they have to take care of you. And in most cases, they're not in position to do so, which brings undue stress. When I meet with a lot of clients, I always discuss the fact that there's 3 things in life that you have to prepare for: living too long, dying too soon, and becoming disabled along the way. Oftentimes and not, we don't really take that to heed until something happens to someone that we know of. It goes back to, we need to get this taken care of because we don't want this burden to be placed on our children. So with that being said, you often discuss financial identity. How does someone begin to rebuild their life when their internalized narratives like budgeting means you're broke or I'm just not good with money?
You know, you brought up some good points about people not planning for the future. I use the spectrum of intention to help illustrate how becoming personally independent requires financial means. Obtaining financial means requires growth. I explain how money flows towards those who add value. You need to identify yourself as someone who adds value rather than being dependent on others. By sharing the model and giving them a view of these different stages, particularly if they're young, they can think about their future rather than just thinking about their career. They can begin to think beyond their career, even if they're in their 20s. What's going to happen to me at what point in my life? And the sooner you begin to think about that, the more you'll have a broader perspective of your entire life, really.
How does mindset shift influence where someone lands on the intention spectrum?
My 4 magic M's mindset is at the top, right? So everybody begins as a passenger on the spectrum. Without a mindset shift, you eventually become a navigator or a driver simply by doing what you're told to do. But a major mindset shift is required to become a traveler or a guide, to go beyond just making a living, getting by, to really be independent financially and personally. You have to be intentional about your long-term plans, your long-term goals for your life. And without mindset, without even believing that it can be possible for you, it'll be really challenging for you to get there.
So you mentioned herd mentality, right? That's something that we tend to FOMO, fear of missing out. Us growing up, it was keeping up with the Joneses. That's what we understand, but now they add a clinical name, I guess, to it as FOMO. But this question here is diving into stages 1 and 2. What have you noticed about people who feel financially stuck, not because of income, but because of inherited financial beliefs such as just survive, don't build, or money changes people?
Usually they have a lower level of confidence and they avoid taking any sort of risk. They believe the comfort zone is the safe zone when it's really the most dangerous place to be. When people are stuck, it really requires confidence. It really requires intention to get unstuck. And I think that's something that we all have to deal with, regardless of what stage we're in. Even if we're successful, we have to be mindful that we can get stuck in the comfort zone. Even executives struggle with this sometimes. They have all the money they want, but then at some point you start realizing, is this really my purpose? Is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Because the further along you get in your life, the more you start either accepting that comfort and staying in the comfort zone, or you want to continue to challenge yourself, just like you did when you were young. We're all born as passengers. We didn't know how to walk. We didn't know how to talk. These were all challenges that we overcome. And they were all things that we were fearful of: falling down, riding a bike. So you need to learn to build the confidence and to face fear kind of head on at all stages of your life, really.
So how do you move someone from avoidance to action?
I like to help by having them create a map of where they want to be, where they want to go. Only when you have a map can you really initiate movement. And again, going back to the fact that success requires you to get out of the comfort zone, because even back when we were children, we had to fail in order to grow. And so the key thing is, even as we get older, we have to continue to remember that concept. We have to realize that movement means we're doing things that are uncomfortable because we're not familiar with it. Learning about financial literacy. These are things you don't know about initially, and you're uncomfortable. People don't trust the stock market. People are uncomfortable risking their money. You have to build this mindset around being uncomfortable with the things that you're learning in order to grow. And that's where intention comes in. You have to be conscious of it and intentionally face it head on, regardless of your fear.
That's a great answer, because you mentioned the stock markets. You have a lot of loss aversion, risk aversion. With most individuals, we put more emphasis on the opportunity of losing versus gaining. And you find that a lot, especially within marginalized communities, as you mentioned earlier, because we just don't trust the system. We're not really interested in the stock market. But one thing that you find within the communities is a big push, a spike in crypto, because that's herd mentality. That's something that get rich quick. And it's interesting, it was a study that suggested that within marginalized communities, there's more individuals with crypto than with stock, and focusing on the fundamentals. And again, that gets back to the herd mentality, not looking at the fundamentals, looking at the long term versus the short term, not properly planning, not understanding the 3 phases of financial planning. All of these things come into play, and we just don't have the patience to really understand what to do, because in this generation, we want everything to happen immediately overnight.
There's this element of trust. So when it comes to the stock market versus crypto, for many people, there's this impression that the stock market is controlled, when it's really driven by emotion. People's emotion every day drives the stock market up and down. We can see that happening right now with this current presidency. But when it comes to crypto, there's the impression that it's not controlled by the government, that crypto is somehow something that we can invest in and we can get rich quick, as you mentioned, without the government or anybody controlling it. So I think there's this element of trust that's at play too.
I agree. So when someone finally decides to take ownership of their financial journey, what's one empowering behavior or mindset that helps them move from intention to not fear?
As you mentioned, the herd mentality, it's a real thing, right? But it can also work in your favor. Being around others who have achieved what you want will help you take ownership and move further in your financial journey. So you need to get mentors. You need to change your environment in some cases. But more importantly, you need to build a map based on their advice. They're going to tell you, here are the things that I did. Here are some of the things that you can do. Here's some of the things that I failed at, so you can avoid some of those missteps that they make. So I think that's the most important thing, really getting mentors, getting in the right environment.
So looking at yourself as an example, you just mentor now, you retired, you've been able to go through the 6 stages of the 7-stage generational wealth model. So you're in a pretty good position right now. What's one early experience that shaped your view of money, whether empowering or limiting?
When I was early in my marriage, I got into some credit card debt. I thought that because I had a job, I could borrow money and just pay money back. I really didn't understand that compound interest can work against me as well as for me. Early on, I kind of realized that I got to pay attention to how I'm managing money, not just paycheck to paycheck, but how I'm managing it long term.
So as we wrap up, Brian, what's the key message you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
Primarily, I want listeners to recognize that the path to personal and financial independence is really paved with intentional growth, right? And that means continuing to challenge yourself, learning things that you're uncomfortable about, particularly when it comes to money. The stock market, as we've talked about, is one major gap in marginalized communities. We just don't trust it. And so without it, the stock market or real estate, it's going to be really difficult to build wealth. One of the projects that I'm involved in now, this summer, I'm going to be participating in a speakers panel to students at the University of Phoenix. It'll be a series of discussions throughout the summer. So continuing to speak, I'm definitely going to continue with the business, operating the market, being an entrepreneur. That is a journey that I'm taking for my own personal growth. Having worked in a corporate environment for over 30 years, now being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, that's a whole new challenge for me. And so regardless of what stage you're at, you need to continue to grow. So that's one of the things that I'm involved in.
So, Brian, you mentioned that you like to do public speaking. You speak at events and schools and things of that nature. If someone wanted to reach out to you and book you to come and speak at their event, how would they get in contact with you?
Primarily, they can connect with me on my website. It's brianlthomas.com. So on my website, you can find out the variety of topics I speak about, and you can connect with me there. On social media, at one Brian L. Thomas on LinkedIn and social media platforms. That's my handle. You can always find a way to get in touch with me. Primarily LinkedIn, you can send me a message. I'd be happy to talk to you personally or to your organization.
Brian, on behalf of the New Wealth Wave podcast, myself, my producer, Ray Haycraft, we'd like to thank you for coming into the studio today. This is your second time and sharing your thoughts. It's been outstanding. Again, I love talking about the financial passenger. I highlighted it in my book as well. So people are going to say, who is this Brian Thomas? He coined the phrase. They're going to cite you eventually, the financial passenger. They can talk about your spectrum as well. But as we always say, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And I will see you on the next episode of the New Wealth Wave podcast. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwavepodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Wave podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Wave podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Wave podcast.